This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Headlines about book challenges in libraries have swirled around states like Texas and Florida. Librarians Where We Live say they've also seen similar spikes in recent years. Coming up, we'll hear from Sam Lee with the Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee, plus Colchester librarian Kate Byroade, who recently fielded a complaint about a RuPaul biography on her shelves. But first, the American Library Association just reported their annual tally for the book challenges last year. There was more than 1,200 demands to censor library books and resources in 2022. That's nearly double 2021's numbers. Here to discuss the increase in challenges and the resources ready to help local librarians is Deborah Caldwell-Stone. She's the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Thank you so much for joining us today, Deborah.
Thanks for inviting me, Catherine. Glad to be here.
Is this happening in your town? What are your concerns? You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Deborah, let's dig into this new report. What can you tell us about this year's numbers and the ALA's broader concerns about the story that it tells?
Well, the numbers are numbers we've never seen. I've been with ALA for 2 decades doing this work, and we've just, I just can't describe it. It's just not, we've just not seen this kind of campaign to censor large numbers of books, primarily books that deal with the lives and experiences of LGBTQIA persons and persons of color. The numbers reflect a real change in the nature of challenges. We expect a parent to have a discussion with a librarian, with a teacher, when they see their student, their child reading a book and they have concerns about it. And that's been going on forever. And in fact, we welcome that conversation. We want parents to be involved with their child's reading. But what these numbers reflect is a real sea change. What we're seeing is political advocacy groups, self-styled parents' rights groups, coming to school boards, coming to library boards, demanding the censorship of 50 or 100 at a time, clearly not having really examined or read the books, but condemning the books because someone has told them that they don't meet someone's political, religious, or moral agendas. And so we're seeing this, we're seeing it reflected in many states where books by the hundreds are being removed from particularly school library shelves, but this is also targeting public libraries as well. And we're deeply concerned that this idea that there are just some books that are beyond the pale. These are all books that are published by mainstream publishers that address important concerns, tell particular stories about the lives of individuals in our communities that young people want to see on the shelf. They want to see their lives reflected on the shelves of their school library and public library. And these books are being removed to suit a political agenda and really to deny the freedom to read of the students, take away their choice, their ability to make decisions for themselves.
And just a note for our listeners that you can check out this report at unitedagainstbookbans.org. Deb, you were on the show, I believe, last year as well to talk about this. And so we're here almost a little over a year later, sort of having the same conversation, but with different numbers now. And this report also notes that there's the use of lists or a compilation of book titles, which played a huge role in driving the spike. Can you talk about how that impacted the numbers and also where social media comes in?
Certainly. We do know that groups like Moms for Liberty, No Left Turn in Education, Parents Defending Education have social media groups, often private, where they trade information about books that should be targeted for censorship. They may not couch it quite in those terms, but that's the practical effect, that once a book hits social media, of these groups. We look at, there are various Facebook groups and Twitter accounts. We can almost count down to the time when we receive a report from a school or a library that book is being challenged. And it's grown into these lists of books. And so, the numbers are reflecting the fact that, a list goes out, a list is maintained on a website, and we will see that list turn up in a challenge inevitably down the road, and very frequently, very soon. And that's what's driving this. When they show up with that list of 50 or 100 books at the board meeting demanding their removal, it's because they pulled that list from social media. And social media has allowed these lists to be shared widely, to become a viral phenomenon. And the lists describe these books in the worst terms, often misinformation, disinformation about the contents of the book. And so we see, these books like Ruby Bridges has written a little autobiography of her experience as a 6-year-old integrating the New Orleans schools in 1960. And it uses historical photographs. It's written for first and second graders, but yet it's been condemned and added to a list of books that should come out of school libraries and public libraries. Even a book about seahorses that accurately, factually reports the fact that male seahorses carry the babies and give birth. Again, a book intended for primary grade readers has been added to a list of books. And so we see the amplification. We see, the same books being challenged over and over again. And the overriding theme we're seeing is books that are being challenged most often address the lives and experiences of LGBTQ people, or they address things like puberty, information about reproductive health, keeping oneself safe and healthy around one's sexuality. Are the books that we're seeing challenged most often today, but there's still a significant number of books that are also being challenged because they deal with racism or the experiences of persons of color as well. These are the two overriding themes.
Well, and you mentioned earlier, you've been doing this for 20 years, and last year having this conversation, it was a very unprecedented situation dealing with the numbers that's coming in, and clearly it has been, even the numbers are even higher today. Can you give us a sense of the kinds of resources that the ALA provides for librarians, and when do you normally step in?
Well, we maintain a vast number of resources for librarians to consult when they are dealing with a book challenge in their library. Advice on how to conduct a reconsideration process, what the reconsideration process should consist of, resources on for example, if a particular title is challenged, we have resources that describe the book, offer the reviews that came out at the time the book was published, any awards the book has received, so that they have information to support the retention of the book in the collection. We offer counsel. We also offer legal information. There is a large number of legal precedents that address the First Amendment rights of both students and public readers, their right to both access the library and the right to be free from censorship of library resources. The fact is that, public institutions like public schools and public libraries are governed by the First Amendment, and they can't remove books simply because they don't like the ideas in the book or the viewpoint of the author. That's considered a violation of the First Amendment right of the reader. And so we offer guidance on all these topics, how, right down to guidance on how to write a good reconsideration policy, or guidance on how to write a material selection policy that supports a diverse collection in the library. We will offer one-on-one counseling for librarians who request it. We'll make referrals out to allied organizations when that's needed. And we also maintain resources for librarians who are experiencing, what has accompanied this is really an attack on the professionalism of librarians and their very character. And so we'll even offer resources that will support legal assistance for a librarian when that's necessary through the Merit Fund, which is a humanitarian fund that is available to librarians who either need legal assistance or assistance when their employment has been threatened over issues like what books are in the collection. So we try to provide the best resources we can to support our library professionals out in the field when they're dealing with this issue.
So I want to bring in Sam Lee, who's the co-chair of Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee and the head of reference services at Enfield Public Library, to sort of help us zero in on how this is playing out where we live. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sam.
Thank you for having me.
So we know the Connecticut Library Association doesn't have exact numbers on book challenges, but I know you anecdotally keep track of what's been reported to your office. Can you talk to us about what has that been like for you?
Well, when I first became Intellectual Freedom co-chair a few years ago, I would get a call maybe once every 3 months or so when it comes to a challenge or a privacy concern. And the calls starting around, I want to say, fall of 2020, started coming fast and furious. I'd get calls almost every month. At one point, I was getting referrals and emails once a week. It'd be little concerns, big concerns. But I think last we looked at it, I think we had something about 40 different challenges in the last year or so, a market increase over what I had experienced when I first took on this position.
What I was going to say, 40 versus one phone call in 3 months, that's a pretty drastic change. And Deb mentioned earlier some of the resources that ALA provides. You also spoke about before about how the association is a huge resource in responding to book challenges. But I believe you've also found success in pointing to Connecticut's legal definition of obscenity. Can you talk about that experience?
Yeah, so what we've seen is these bad faith arguments from parental right groups, and they're calling books obscene when they're not. And there is a legal definition in the Connecticut general statutes that describes what is obscene. And the things that folks are describing in these school board meetings or these parental right groups, they don't meet the legal definition in Connecticut. They would love to say that we have pornography or obscenity or obscene things in our libraries, but none of our materials meet those definitions. And so it's a bad faith argument that incites people to get angry. It's misleading, and it puts libraries and librarians' lives at risk.
And what else has changed in the last year, Sam? Have you been focusing more on the school library side of things or other perspectives? Talk to us about your experience recently.
Absolutely. I come from the public library side, so I'm really familiar with our policies and procedures and some of the legal precedent there on the public library side. Since the beginning of this school year, I've definitely had to get more knowledgeable and more familiar with what's going on in the school libraries. There have been certainly a lot more challenges in the school libraries than I had ever seen. A lot more colleagues from our school librarian sides are reaching out, and they're parroting a lot of the same arguments that these materials are obscene, that they're inappropriate for children, that they want more parental control over these materials. And again, it's a bad faith argument because which parents get to decide for whose children? One parent shouldn't decide for an entire school district whether or not a material is appropriate for them. And it shouldn't be, that compromises that their students' First Amendment rights to access free speech, and that's a problem.
And Deb, I want to bring you back in real quick. We know that about 58% of the reported book challenges were in school or classroom libraries or school curricula, and 41% were in public libraries. So they're two different spaces, but they're seeing the same sort of situation going on. What are you hearing from school librarians, and how does this process differ?
Well, school libraries are slightly different in that there's a little more discretion on curating the collection for the mission of the school district, the educational goals of the school district to support the curriculum, in addition to providing for reading, for self-fulfillment, for entertainment, for curiosity that goes beyond the curriculum. But what I would tell you about school librarians is they're feeling enormously under attack, I often think that they're bearing the brunt of this coordinated campaign to sanitize libraries, whether it's a school library or public library. I'd also tell you that what we're really seeing is what I've observed for many years. The books that are challenged are books that are being made available to students, to children, to young adults. We very rarely see challenges brought to books that are written for adult audiences and are generally available to adult audiences. This is an attack on the ability of young people to read and discover ideas, and it's all based on that pernicious lie that Sam has identified, this false claim that books dealing with gender identity, sexual orientation, that talk about sex ed, are somehow pornographic and inappropriate for minors. And as Sam accurately said, it's just not true. The law doesn't support them. I actually think that they actually know it, but that's their way of garnering support for their claims. And the end result is we're seeing shelves stripped of books that reflect the lives of who've been traditionally marginalized in our community. And it's really narrowing the opportunity for learning. It's depriving students of the ability to learn more about other people, about themselves. And we know that diverse reading materials really do support improved educational outcomes. We actually have a white paper on that on the website for Unite Against Book Bans at uniteagainstbookbans.org that documents the need to have diverse books on the shelf of the library to improve reading, improve literacy and educational outcomes for young people.
Well, and especially for school libraries, a lot of people are taking their concerns to school boards. So, Deb, I want to ask, what's the range of how school boards might structure their book challenge protocols? Like, what can they actually do? What's the process like?
Well, generally what we recommend is that there be the ability for a parent to raise a concern about a book. We do support the First Amendment to the extent that we also support the right to petition the government about a concern, right? But that process should require the individual to indicate if they've read the book and why they're concerned with the book, and turn that in to the librarian. And then we recommend that a committee be formed to review the book in light of the library's collection development policy, material selection policy, to determine if the book was acquired according to policy and if it meets the mission and needs of the reading community, and that in schools, that would be the students. And if it both meets the needs of some or all of the students in the school. And if it was acquired according to policy, we recommend that it be retained in the library collection. And that determination should be made by the committee. Often there's a right to appeal the decision to the board or the administrator of the school. But in that case, they should be following the same protocol as the reconsideration committee. Because librarians do their job well. They're aware of these, they're absolute professionals in what they do. 99.5% of the time that book is being retained. And if it isn't retained, it's often just moved to another age group in the libraries the larger district collections, because it's determined that maybe it's a better fit for middle school than elementary or something like that.
And Sam, with what Deb just said, what are we observing here in Connecticut regards to school libraries? Because these processes aren't generally supposed to be open to public comment, but more to parents and community members who are bringing those concerns. What are your thoughts?
What we're seeing is this interesting campaign of astroturfing, where these campaigns of book challenges start online in social media, like Deborah had said earlier, but it's not natural. It doesn't bubble up naturally from the community. We get these circulating lists that come from national organizations like Moms for Liberty and No Left Turn for Education, and then somebody latches on to that list and then decides to essentially storm school board meetings and say, do you have these books on the shelves? How dare you? Without taking a moment to actually go through the list of the books or go and see if the books are in the collection. And sometimes they just storm these meetings and say, oh, you need to take these books off, without realizing whether or not those books are actually there. One of the instances that was really depressing to hear about was what happened at the Westport High School, Staples High. Back in September, libraries all across the country celebrate Banned Books Week. Staples High School had a banned books display, and parents were upset about some of the books featured in that display, and asked and wanted the removal of that. And what is supposed to be a week in celebrating our freedom of speech and our freedom to read and to foster rich dialogue became a witch hunt for inappropriate materials. And what is really disappointing in this is that these parents showed a gross distrust of students' critical thinking skills and analytical thought. What is supposed to be empowering, an empowering display to encourage students to explore new ideas, to discover new perspectives, was really this moment when the parents said, no, we don't trust you to do that.
And Deborah, we've got about a minute left, but I do want to ask, how would you qualify Connecticut on the national landscape? We know bans and removal requests are supported by law in Florida. What are you seeing?
Well, Connecticut is generally have been supportive of the freedom to read, what we're seeing, but you're not, Connecticut isn't free from book challenges. I tell you that while we're seeing the worst in some states like Florida and Texas right now, there's no state in the union that's been free of attacks like this. We're seeing it in every state, in every community. I reside in Chicago, and in our suburbs, we're seeing attacks like this as well, where you might not expect it in Illinois. So we're seeing the impact of this campaign by these groups in almost every community, every state. And I really fear for our education process, for the children, for our librarians who are caught up in this fight.
You've been listening to Deborah Caldwell Stone. She's the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Thank you so much, Deborah, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Catherine. I'm glad to be here.
And Sam Lee will be staying with us. Coming up next, we'll hear from one local librarian who recently fielded a very public book removal request. What questions do you have? Call us at 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. How are Connecticut librarians responding to book challenges? Here to talk about their experience is Kate Byroade. She's a library director at the Cragin Memorial Library in Colchester. And still with us is Sam Lee. She's the co-chair of Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee and the head of reference services at Enfield Public Library. Thank you so much both for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Kate, we mentioned earlier on the show that you've had to deal with a very public book removal request. Can you share with us what that experience was like and how you responded?
That experience was kind of head spinning at the moment because normally a book challenge process is all about our procedure. There's that form that somebody fills out, and it's very quiet. And instead, the challenge was publicized to the community, and almost within 15 minutes or so, I started getting phone calls and emails and concern about it. So the challenge was to a book called Who is RuPaul? It's a children's biography of the famous drag queen RuPaul, and it is written for fourth graders approximately. And it had been on our June Pride display that we had up at the library. So that display had a mix of books for all ages, picture books, nonfiction biographies like that of RuPaul, Harvey Milk. We have one on Harvey Milk, and even parenting books, parenting your LGBTQ child, that kind of thing. And the book was, the concern was brought to me, and I was, said, hey, we have a form, we have a policy, we're happy to conduct the review and look at the book. And then it went live on social media as a concern, and the community of Colchester really rallied to the library.
And can you give us a sense of how librarians are prepared to respond to these kinds of things, Kate? We've been talking about how a lot of this has been very unprecedented. When we had this conversation last year, it was a pretty big surprise for most, but now a year later, we're having this conversation. Clearly, it's still an issue. How is it going for local librarians from where you're sitting?
So I think we are prepared pretty well. For example, when I was in graduate school, I took a course in intellectual freedom and censorship, and got a really good grounding in sort of model policies, model procedure. Got a good we were introduced to general statutes on obscenity that, like Sam Lee talked about earlier. So I had that preparation in an academic sense, but I've actually had Sam Lee, she's chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee, and that committee nearly always has some kind of continuing education program at our annual conference here in Connecticut. So while the rate right now is very high, we're in a wave of challenges. I would say that professionally, we have continuing education that prepares us well to handle these concerns from the public, and we're ready to meet them. But the sheer number of them and the type and style of them, that has been sort of unprecedented.
Well, now I was going to ask you if you've noticed an uptick in recent years. So it sounds like there has been, or was this one of the sort of first big public movements that really propelled the increase? What was that?
Yeah. If I could. So I became library director a little over 13 years ago. And when I came, there was a stack of challenge forms. We have them ready at the desk. And when I got there in 2009, they were yellow already. They'd been undisturbed. No challenge had been received in many years. And then I knew about this wave. Sam was talking in meetings about how, she'd been receiving more and more. And I was aware of colleagues who had dealt with challenges to books in their collections. And so I said, these old yellow forms look kind of old and tatty. So I printed out new ones and a new stack of them. And in fact, they had been waiting quietly for about 6 months. And then the challenge to RuPaul went public. That day, someone came in and asked for 75 forms. Later in the week, somebody came in and asked for 10 forms. Fortunately for me and my workload, I didn't see any of those forms come back to the library. But yeah, the forms were waiting patiently.
And Sam, talking about this incident in Colchester, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions about the role of the library and librarians when it comes to incidences like this?
Well, we have collections and we have all these different viewpoints on our shelves. One of my favorite quotes, of course, is if you haven't found something to offend you in the public library, we're not doing our job. We try to maintain as much access and freedom of access to the public library as possible. We have a diversity of books, a diversity of opinions. They all live on our shelves and we don't judge those books. Having those books on our shelves isn't an implicit nod to those books. We're not saying that we agree with them or that we don't. We are here to provide resources to the community. When we go through these reconsideration processes and challenges, we're not trying to trip people up and get them to say awful things about the books or anything like that. We respect due process. That's what the reconsideration procedure and process is. We respect people's First Amendment rights. We respect people's rights to get offended by our materials, but we want to maintain access because we believe very much in the First Amendment, the freedom to read, and the freedom to access free speech.
I want to take a moment to have a call from Kenny in Meriden, who has some thoughts that he would like to share. Kenny? Is Kenny there? Well, we're going to try to bring Kenny back if we can, but would like to ask Sam too. You mentioned the Westport example earlier. There was genuine sort of difficulty for us to wrap our minds around that story. So can you talk about your idea of misconceptions about the role of libraries and librarians?
Well, I love that libraries are here as a space. We are founded on the First Amendment. That we have free speech, and that free speech means nothing unless you have access to it. It could mean books, it could mean access to our computers to read what's online, but it means free speech, and that's free speech for everyone, free speech all the time. When it comes to the Westport incident, that celebration of Banned Books Week is really important to us as a profession. It reminds us why we do what we do. The books are here for everybody. The resources of the library are here for everybody. We are one of the last truly democratic institutions in our society. And for somebody to get upset about our celebration of the First Amendment really misses the point. We are a free country. We are a democracy that relies on free speech in order to be healthy, and to suppress speech or to for somebody to call one speech obscene over somebody else's objections, that really hinders the conversation and it is detrimental to democracy. So in the Westport example, again, I think of it as a celebration. We celebrate Banned Books Week because we're not actually banning these books. These are books that are available, that are open, that we want our students to explore and read and develop critical thinking skills about it and to use their analytical thought to decide for themselves if they agree with them, if they don't, or provide windows and mirrors and doors into other worlds. So when we hear this story about parents being upset about a banned books display, it's a really sad moment because we think about our students as the future, as future citizens. And here are these parents saying, no, we don't trust you to do that. You're too young to do that. And that's not empowering. what I love in working in public libraries is empowering people. And that's what we do every day by getting the right books in their hands, by giving them the skills they need to navigate whatever challenges that they're going through. We have those books, we have those resources, those are for everybody, and we like to empower people.
So I do want to share a comment from Kenny from Meriden, who said that the ALA said they're getting complaints from all 50 states, and if people from all 50 states have a problem, maybe it is a problem. Still with us is Deborah Caldwell Stone, who is the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Deborah, would love to get your response to what Kenny has to say.
If there is a problem, the problem is that there are individuals who would like to tell others what they can read and what they can think about, and demanding that the government support their ideas about what's appropriate for other readers. I think we need to remember that we do have that First Amendment right to read, to access information, free speech, to think for ourselves, make choices for ourselves, make our own choices about our beliefs. And when a group of partisan advocates demand that our reading be limited based on their preferences, that's a real threat to liberty. That's true indoctrination. And we always should be concerned with, even at a single incident of censorship that's imposed by a decision by a government board of any kind to remove a book from a library, to stop us from thinking and reading on our own grounds. And that it's cropping up in 50 states is a concern to me. I think that it reflects a disregard for those rights, and a misconception about what liberty really means.
And so we got another minute left, but I do want to ask Deborah that there's been a lot of polarization around this, which does add pressure on the association to respond. Do you have concerns about how ALA responds because of this idea that somehow libraries are a space where political agendas can be pushed to the public, which also leads me to ask another question, is how important it is to define true neutrality here?
Well, ALA is nonprofit, nonpartisan, and our mission is to make sure that there are excellent library services available for everyone in the community. That's been our mission for over 100 years, and that includes having access to the information and ideas that you're curious about, and making sure that your information needs are met by your community, your local library. And all of our work goes into making that mission real. So I would say that, we are very concerned about this attack. Libraries are community institutions, essential community institutions. And beyond books, they are there to provide broadband access to those who don't have it, access to government information and services, promoting literacy skills, reading skills, the ability to learn more, prepare for careers, support homeschoolers, support small businesses. If libraries go away, just think of what is lost for the community. And so using these book bans as an attack on libraries as an institution, on the professionalism of librarians, the work that libraries and librarians do is deeply concerning to us. And we are doing our best to respond to it, and working with our state affiliates like the Connecticut Library Association to respond to it, to support library professionals, to support libraries, and to make sure that library services remain available for everyone in the community.
You've been listening to Deborah Caldwell Stone, Director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. Thank you so much. And both Kate and Sam will stick around to continue our chat about book challenges. What are you seeing where you live? Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Back with us to discuss the uptick in book challenges, book challenge requests here in Connecticut is Kate Byroade. She's a library director at the Cragin Memorial Library in Colchester, and Sam Lee, who's the co-chair of Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee and the head of reference services at Enfield Public Library. You can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So jumping right back in, Sam, I want to talk about if graphic novels or picture books are also part of this discussion of claims of obscenity.
Absolutely. There's this perception, false perception, I think, that if it's a visual representation of something, that it's somehow more pornographic. And again, we go back to our state's general statutes about obscenity. Graphic novels do not meet the definition of obscenity laws in Connecticut. Picture books are not automatically obscene just because they contain LGBTQ characters. But we do see a lot of these challenges against picture books and graphic novels.
And so in January, the city of Stamford joined Chicago in designating itself as a book sanctuary city. And there's a new bill that would require every city to designate a sanctuary library where patrons are promised access to books that might be challenged in other libraries. Sam, what's your response been to this kind of designation?
I love the support from our legislators recognizing the hard work that libraries do in maintaining access to books and ideas and wanting to protect and maintain that access. We're really excited to see that legislation be proposed and come through. Our concern is, of course, that it might encourage other people to continue to challenge library collections. So we want these protections for our colleagues. We want to maintain access for the public to our collections. We just don't always want more attention paid to it so that more people feel like they should challenge our collections.
So just want to take a quick moment to take a quick call from Lisa in Guilford. Lisa, are you there?
Hi, yes, thanks for taking my call. In Guilford, we're having a bit of a situation similar to what your panelists have noted happening across our state and country. And one of the things that we're hearing from the parents who are challenging is, I just want to know when my child has accessed this, or we should be alerted to when these materials are available in the school library. We want them labeled, so they'll say, we don't necessarily want them banned. We just don't want our kids to read them. And I just wanted for the panelists to maybe respond to how that is not a solution and how we could message that back to the parents.
Well, thank you so much for that call. Lisa, I would like to ask Sam, can you respond to what Lisa has to say?
Well, the Guilford superintendent actually released an excellent statement in support of intellectual freedom and access in their school library collections. When it comes to parent control, parents always have control over what their children and what their students are accessing. They are responsible for the media consumption of their children and kids. However, schools are not responsible for parenting other people's children. They're there to educate students, to empower them, to help them guide their reading and materials. That conversation between parents and children is very private, is very intimate. We don't deign to intrude upon that conversation, and we're not trying to hinder that conversation. But it's absolutely up to a parent to decide and communicate those expectations with their children. When we talk about labeling and designating some books or providing warning to folks, school library collections are easily searchable and on a lot of school websites. Their catalogs are open to the public, so parents can review what's in those collections. Of course, there can be thousands, easily 20,000. The numbers can go up to 20,000 in materials. So it's up to a parent to figure out and communicate those expectations with their students. But when we label items, when we label books, if we label books, we have to be careful about how we label those books for children, because it's fine if we offer directional aid, but if we place a subjective label on them, we're putting an implicit bias on those books, and that's not what we do in libraries.
Sam,
that's really not what we do in school libraries. Sorry.
No worries. I do want to really quickly ask you too. We know that there have been incidences at libraries hosting story hours with drag queens, and a group NPR described as a nascent neo-Nazi group in New England crashed a story hour in Taunton, Massachusetts earlier this year. Can you respond to if this is something that you're prepared for here in Connecticut, Sam?
We have excellent libraries who are doing drag queen story times, and it is the outreach efforts of librarians in creating a safe space for our drag queens to do story hours that most libraries feel confident that they can do story hours, drag queen story hours safely for our LGBT community. It is concerning. We are always cognizant of threats that may happen, and my committee is always prepared to help people run through threat assessments and figure out what else needs to be done in order to maintain the safety of our drag queens, of our patrons, and of the library and library workers.
And joining us now by phone is Sarah Warbelow, who's the legal director for the Human Rights Campaign. Sarah, what's your response to this issue and the larger threats facing libraries? You've got about 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's deeply concerning that there are individuals who think that violence and threats are the appropriate way to disagree with events that are happening in the public square. Drag queen story hours and other performances are completely voluntary. Nobody has to take their child to it if they don't want to. And it's important to distinguish between what is a performance that is intended for adults, which would happen in a bar or a nightclub, versus an all-ages performance. It's just like a movie theater. There are some materials that are appropriate only for mature audiences, and there are some materials that are appropriate for all ages. And we should not be painting all drag performances with a broad brush, but understanding that those events that take place in the general public are family friendly, and they're about inclusion. They are about exposure to a wide variety of ideas, and that's what makes America great, is that we can enjoy and experience a plethora of ideas that aren't limited to one particular viewpoint.
I want to thank Sarah so much for that input. And you've been listening to Sam Lee, co-chair of Connecticut Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee and head of reference services at Enfield Public Library. Thank you so much, Sam, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You were also listening to Kate Byroade, who's the library director at the Cragin Memorial Library in Colchester. Thank you, Kate, for spending time with us today.
You're very welcome. I was happy to be here.
I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.